A very good evening and welcome to First Talk with Violet Gonda. Members of Parliament were sworn in to the 8th Parliament of Zimbabwe today. The swearing-in ceremony was immediately followed by the elections of the Speaker of the National Assembly and the Senate President and their deputies. In protest of what they say was a stolen election, the MDCT boycotted the elections of the leaders of the legislature, which saw ZANU-PF's Jacob Mudenda elected as the new speaker and Mabel Chinomona as a deputy speaker of the National Assembly. Edna Madzongwe retained her position as Senate President, while Chen Chimtengwende became the Deputy President of the Senate. There are a total of 270 National Assembly seats, 210 for elected constituency members and 60 seats reserved for women MPs elected by a party list system of proportional representation. 6 for each of the 10 provinces based on how many votes each participating party got in the constituency elections in each province. ZANU-PF has a total of 197 MPs, MDCT 70, MDC 2. There is one independent, and that's Jonathan Samkange, who told First TV in previous interview he will side with ZANU-PF in Parliament as he still considers himself a ZANU-PF member. Today on First Talk, we take a look at the composition of the Parliament and what it means for the country. My first guest is newly appointed ZANU-PF Chief Whip Joram Gumbo. So first of all, Mr. Gumbo, can you tell us how the day went today at the National Assembly?
Yes, what happened today starting at 9 o'clock is that all the members of the House of Assembly were being sworn in by the Clerk of Parliament. We had all the ZANU-PF members of Parliament who were sworn in. Then from the MDCT side, only 2 did not pitch up. But the response was very good because only 2 out of the elected 210 means that 208 members of Parliament were sworn in today. After which, we then went ahead and they elected the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker of Parliament. We elected the Honorable Mudenda, Jacob Francis Mudenda, as the Speaker of the House of Assembly, and Madam Mabel Chinomona as the Deputy Speaker. When we did these elections for the Speaker and Deputy Speaker, that was actually the conclusion of today's work at the lower house level.
So what are the qualities of Mr. Jacob Mudenda that made you as a party choose him for the speakership position?
Honorable Dr. Mudenda has got a long history as a government civil servant. He worked as a district administrator and he worked as a provincial administrator. Later when he was appointed the governor of Matabeleland North, he's a businessman. He sits on several boards, and also he was the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission. That's one of his qualifications. He's got his own law firm. So we thought, as far as we're concerned, he's a very sober person, Christian, a person with who commands a lot of respect among many people, and a person who we think is level-headed. We think is very impartial in his dealings. So we thought he was the best person to take up this position. So we're actually happy that he has been elected and accepted to be Speaker of the House of Assembly.
Did the MDC participate in this election?
No, as usual, they normally shun such events. You know, like you find that they shun when you sit down at the Heroes Acre when we bury the people who liberated us, whom they must actually be respecting, because the freedom that we enjoy is because of the sacrifice of such people. They don't come to such events. So they only got sworn in after being sworn in when we waited for the Chief Justice, who came in to administer the oath for the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker. They had left. So they didn't participate, and we knew that they were not going to participate. And I think by now that they've already said that even at the opening of Parliament, when the President comes, they will not come, they will be away. But anyway, Zimbabwe goes on, and we have a majority. We will continue to do what we have to do for our people of Zimbabwe, irrespective of what political party they represent. Those who are elected as MDs, if they want to continue to do what they are doing, it's okay with us, but we will continue even to look after the interests of the people they claim to represent.
But what do you make of their argument that by participating in such events, it will be legitimizing what they say was an illegitimate process, and that ZANU-PF stole the elections?
Unless you tell me that even those who are in Parliament, we had to read for them, then I can say, well, what does this now mean? But if members of Parliament were elected and they won, and they are supposed to come and they represent the people they won, they have no excuse to make. Those who did not make it are not the ones who are supposed to come here and be sworn in, but those who won. So if there was a selection to say that you are legitimizing the election by coming to such events, then I don't understand what that means. If you are a reasonable person, at least a little bit reasonable, you must understand and separate issues. This is a situation whereby members who won are here. We also have members from ZANU-PF who lost. At the last election, MGC had more members than us who did not boycott. People must learn to accept an election. The flimsy excuses they are giving, Zimbabweans are not stupid. They are very intelligent people. They can tell you if there was a problem. And in this particular situation, somebody makes themselves fools by trying to say this is an illegitimate election when they really know that at every particular place where you went to vote, you had representatives representing you, and they signed that everything went on well. If it is an issue of that, we did not get the voters' roll. Who got it? ZANU-PF didn't get it. We didn't get it. We were all, both of us in the inclusive government, we were responsible for those shortcomings. So who to blame and what for? You only blame them after I've lost. It's not even worthwhile talking about. For senior politicians like us, it's not worth looking at or even listening to. I'm only responding to you because you're asking me, but otherwise I wouldn't even respond to such a question because it's not worth spending my energy and responding to it.
So were the chief whips also chosen today?
The chief whips are chosen at their party. They are not chosen in Parliament. MDC sits on its own caucus and appoints its own leaders as whip and the deputy whip. ZANU-PF does the same. So we did that yesterday. And in fact, it was done by our political bureau 2 weeks ago.
And so you were the chief whip in the last Parliament. Have you retained that position?
Yes, I have.
And so what do you hope to do this time, or what is your party going to do this time around that perhaps you were not able to do in the last Parliament?
What we were not able to do at the last Parliament, which we hope that we can do now, is to work for the improvement of our people's lives, to make laws and debate in the House that will assist in promoting development in our country. The last 4 years or 5 years that we had from 2008 to 2013 June were worthless years, and they should not have been written in our records of a Parliament, because we spent the whole time bickering, babbling and talking about things which were not of interest to our people. This time we have to sit down and talk seriously about promoting the lives of our people, improving the lives of our own people. And looking at that, as government, we resuscitate our industry. We make sure that there is support to the Ministry of Agriculture and to see to that good laws are put in place to assist our people to achieve empowerment in our country, because there are many ways and the sources that we can use in order to make our people live a better life. That's what we should be looking at.
Mr. Gumbo, is there any legislation in particular that your party is going to change, especially now that you have a 2/3 majority?
Not necessarily anything. We have a new constitution, and there isn't anything wrong with that new constitution, which we made up together with these outgoing members of parliament from the MDC. But what is critical is to come up with suggestions that you can implement in order to make sure that your country moves forward, which was not possible last time. Because, like I said to you, we spent most of our time quarreling between ourselves.
Many people were saying that now that ZANU-PF is in the majority in parliament, the party will change the constitution. So are you saying ZANU-PF has no plans right now to change the constitution, the new constitution?
That is their own perceptions, and we don't know who the prophet is who might have told them about the future that is going to come. We were not interested in doing that. We are law-abiding. This is why even from 1980, we have been religiously following up what the Constitution says, and we will continue to do that. You must understand that there was even an argument between our President Robert Mugabe and Comrade Sangrai and others when they wanted us to go beyond the 29th June with the old parliament in office, and they were saying, no, the Constitution says 5 years, and the 5 years ends 29th June. We are law-abiding. We don't have to be told by anybody that you must follow the Constitution. We are a country which I think you very well know, with very many educated people, and in fact the highest educated people in Africa are found in Zimbabwe. And we will not cheat our people by doing things that are not even worthwhile doing. Why change the Constitution if it means good to your people? We don't have to do that. We have yet even the Land South Constitution, which we didn't have, which we didn't like. But up until the time that we had to change it together with the MDC, we only had made 18 changes in it, or amendments, after 30 thereabout years. So you can, those people who talk like that, they are just people who are interested in making stories. They want to just make news. And I think it's very good for the newspaper people that people come up with such stories. But we are not perturbed by that, and we will not even worry ourselves about what people are saying. We will continue to work within the law, and that's exactly what we are going to do.
Are there any bills that were left over from the last parliament that can be brought forward?
You must know that the last parliament, I've already told you, it didn't have many bills to worry about. Because most of the time, actually, which is a credit to the last parliament, the only thing that I think they did, it was coming up with a new constitution. So most of the time, we were just dealing with the constitution. We didn't come to parliament many times because there was nothing else to talk about other than that bickering and quarreling amongst ourselves and making motions that were not of benefit to our people.
And from your party, do you know how many people have had to resign from public office since they are now MPs, they're now legislators? Like, I know you had a few PERMSEC.
Because, I think you are aware that we have just, sworn in members of parliament today. So I don't know who was working where and whatever they were doing. So we'll start knowing that from today, because now they've been sworn in. But before today, they were not members of parliament, so they continued to do whatever they were doing. They were members who were waiting for government or other, government of, enterprises.
But since they were sworn in today, they had to resign from public office before they were sworn in today. Is that not the case?
That is the case everywhere in the world. You don't collect two salaries from one employer. You only collect one check from your employer. You can't be a waiter and get a salary of a waiter and be a manager at the same hotel and get the salary of a manager. You don't do that anywhere in the world.
Okay, and the final word, Mr. Gumbo.
Yes.
And do you,
My final word is that I'm happy that we now have a new parliament with a majority from one political party, which gives our people hope that things are going to change. And I look forward to the new government or the new executive, which is going to be appointed shortly, in implementing the promises that ZANU-PF made during the campaigns in their manifesto. And I specifically would want to see that we do something about indigenizing our economy for the benefit of our people, assisting our farmers so that they can produce, revitalizing and coming up with money so that we can restart our industry. Is kind of like it's dead for now. So if you look into those areas and improve the lives of our people, then we can see most of our people who have gone out of the country to look for greener pastures coming back and take up jobs in our country, and then that will bring hope to the young ones and so forth and so on, because there will be employment in the country, and that's what I really am looking forward to.
that was the ZANU-PF chief whip. Sorry, that was the ZANU-PF chief whip Joram Gumbo. Today, legislators were sworn into National Assembly and the Senate, and we are discussing on the program what this 8th Parliament will mean for the country. Do Zimbabweans have confidence in the current crop of leaders, and do you think they will deliver better than the previous parliamentarians? Joining us to discuss this are political analyst Rejoice Ngwenya and Nkululeko Sibanda, and Trevor Maisiri, a senior analyst for Southern Africa with the International Crisis Group, and he's joining us in the studio. Hello and welcome on the program, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good evening, Zimbabwe.
Let me start with Rejoice Ngwenya. Your initial thoughts on this new parliament?
Look, I mean, this parliament comes hot on the heels of the discourse and the debate on its illegitimacy, having been a product of a process that is contestable. So one would really look at this parliament with a kind of a squinted eye and hope that, very soon Zimbabweans will get over this aura of illegitimacy and start using parliament to call public representatives to count. I will probably use this as my entry point about it.
Nkululeko.
I think what's important here for me is to realize that moving forward and having had the swearing in of all the MPs now, including the MDC MPs, is that the process that has brought these guys into Parliament is contestable and to many extents very problematic. But what we also constantly have is that the opposition is constantly participating in those issues that matter the most in the election itself, and now they're all parliamentarians and so on in. Now we need to begin to talk about their ability to lead and the leadership they have going forward in terms of whether or not they can make a huge difference. I think that the opportunities here that the MDC can try and rescue itself, if you look at the composition of the parliament and the caliber of members of parliament on both sides.
Trevor.
Yeah, I think this parliament is going to be very tension-filled. If you look at the previous parliament, there was some level of balance in terms of representation between the two main parties, the MDCT and the ZANU-PF. But what you've got now is you've got a lopsided parliament where ZANU-PF seems to dominate and the MDC now seems to be in the minority. Therefore, this creates a platform for ZANU-PF to go on the offensive, to use its majority, and for MDC to always continue to be on the defensive because of its minority. So you are not likely to see the emergence or the preeminence of individuality in terms of what they can contribute, but you are likely to see the institutions of the parties controlling what comes out of the mouths of the various parliamentarians. So you are going to see a very institutionalized parliament parliament this time around, which is not going to allow free flow of debate based on the individual perceptions of the members thereof. So that tension, I think, is going to suppress the individuality and promote more of the institutional positions of the parties.
But in terms of the individuals as legislators, who stands out?
I mean, it's difficult to say. It's difficult to say because what you realize is there are people that stand out as ordinary members of society. But once they come into an enclave where political parties dominate, it is not who they are or what they want to espouse. It is what they are told to do by their parties. And we have seen historically in Zimbabwe that political parties have not allowed their members, even in parliament, to be themselves. But they have really been whipped into line and they've always presented party positions. So it's difficult to tell who will be the star or who will not be in this parliament.
Nkululeko, do you agree that we're going to see an institutionalized kind of parliament this time around?
I think this election shows you very clearly that this party-based or leader-based political expediency or political process has failed. If you look at both parties, you have about 20 MPs in ZANU-PF who are really MPs and can say something you'd listen to, and about the same number within the MDCT. And that at this time when there is need for leadership renewal, both in the MDC and in ZANU-PF, individual members will be served better by showing themselves, giving themselves up for leadership and taking leadership responsibilities within the party other than following within Parliament other than following the party line. And I think that given this very important variable, which is the leadership renewal between both the parties in the next 5 years, is that you're going to see individuals inserting themselves and taking opportunities to make sure that they are recognized. It's not really always about the vote on a particular matter. I think they're going to clearly understand that it is also about what they say, what they do, and the attention they attract to themselves. And I think that you will see how people like Namasa, Mnangagwa, and so forth are going to try and stand out of the crowd, even Mujuru. But you also have a lot more experience on the MDCT side in terms of parliamentary issues. You actually have the MDC having an upper hand here compared to ZANU-PF, that has a lot of new members who lack experience and have no gravitas at all. And I think that is going to be the playing game, and I think the MDC can use that experience to its advantage, both in terms of voting and in terms of showing which political party knows what it's doing.
But who are the new members that you think are going to stand out and that people will probably listen to?
I think people will be waiting to see what Nelson Chamisa goes in and does. Maridadi will make a lot of noise. I'm not sure if he will make sense. You will have Muzuri in Parliament now. That's going to be a headache for Morgan Tsvangirai, and he might want to insert them himself quite seriously. Gordon Moyo says a few things. I don't think he will make a lot of progress because he's a dependent of Morgan Tsvangirai. Pepango Motsa make a difference, but it's also just a demagoguery, really. It's hyperbole that he brings up. On the ZANU-PF side, I think you will see, as I said, you will see Mnangagwa, you will see Mohadi, you will see people like, I think Parada is going to be a surprise, a kindness, but it's going to be a surprise because on his own he seems to be very assertive. Chinamasa is not going to be a surprise, he's going to be forceful, and Chinamasa is going to be one of the, I think, is going to come out of this parliament one of the most senior leaders of ZANU-PF, in many ways maybe vice president or something like this. But then you'll have a lot of hyperbole, noise that makes no sense, but can gain a lot of attention from people like Chino Timba and my dear friend Tabitha Kumalo. And then you'll have, these might be visible, but I don't think they will make a lot of difference. They'll provide us with a lot of joke.
Rejoice, what do you think, especially on some of the names that have been mentioned so far? We all know Mnangagwa and Chinamasa. Do you think they're going to bring anything different this time?
Well, look, this is where I differ slightly with Trevor, because I think even if the party whipping system and the desire to reflect the party's manifesto, is very, strong in African, parliament. There is room for individual self-expression. And you notice when Sibanda speaks, he is literally speaking about what we call the new stock, the young techs. Those are the individuals who are likely to want to outdo, to prove that the older generation of ZANU-PF members of parliament, was really a non-delivering, patronage, prone type of a group of individuals. I believe really individuals will be keen to show that they can make a difference. I mean, take for instance, we don't even know perhaps who is going to be made a minister, but looking at characters like Temba Moliswa and James Maridadi, you can sense that they are out there to prove that they can make a difference even in a parliament that is generally tainted with patronage. But in a way, ZANU-PF's this overriding influence will still prevail. But then again, those members of parliament who are not going to be making much noise in the House have got committees to prove themselves. The private members bill, it gives a lot of room for individual adventure. So we are up for a very interesting but again contestable House of Parliament.
What about the new speaker, Jacob Mudenda?
Well, Mudenda, knowing him as a very conservative and quiet individual, look, he has a lot to thank Mugabe for. So I don't think he's going to wield as much control of the debate and the direction of discourse in Parliament as his predecessors, like the Mtasas of the world, and of course Love Momoyo. So I can see him just falling into the usual line of compliance, and I don't think that he's going to add value to the debates in this new Parliament.
Trevor, why do you think ZANU-PF has chosen Jacob Mudenda, and what's his claim to fame?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Jacob Mudenda's history, at one time he was the provincial chairperson of ZANU-PF in Matabele North, and also was a former provincial governor in the same province. And if you also look at the time when Professor Reg Austin resigned from the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, Mudenda was seconded to the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, preferably, I think, or presumably on a ZANU-PF ticket. So he's got a history of allegiance, a history of loyalty, and a history of being involved in ZANU-PF structures. But at the same time, he is not an individual that you would present to the Zimbabwean populace and they would see him as someone very political and very threatening, because he has not really been in the very trenches of the hardline positions of ZANU-PF. Therefore, he seems to be a middle ground candidate for ZANU-PF, where ZANU-PF, I think they are under pressure to want to legitimize, obviously, the outcome of the election, but also to show a lot of acceptance, or some level of acceptance from the Zimbabweans in terms of how they're going to run the country and its institutions in the next 5 years. So he seems to be somebody who's not as radical, not as hardliner, and also has been involved in ZANU-PF, loyal to ZANU-PF, but not so much in the forefront. Therefore, I think ZANU-PF has put him forward as an acceptable candidate who they feel may also appeal across the political party lines.
And how important is this position, Speaker of Parliament, especially if we're to look at the previous speakers? Did they do anything significant?
Look, I think the position of Speaker of Parliament is significant, in that that position basically helps in terms of regulating where debate goes and what happens in Parliament. He's basically a convener of Parliament per se. But however, like we've always said, that it is not just the individual position of the Speaker. It is also the mechanics of how Parliament is run in Zimbabwe. Hopefully, maybe under the new constitution, but again, you don't see that much of leverage in the new constitution in terms of giving Parliament that free role to rein in the other arms of the state. But otherwise, the Speaker of Parliament, if you look at other constitutions, the Speaker of Parliament actually becomes the standby president should the president go by any natural or unnatural circumstances. Meaning it's a very high-powered position, which unfortunately in Zimbabwe has also been politicized and has not been given the free role to ensure that Parliament plays its role within the arms of state.
And Nkululeko, what about Jonathan Samkange as the only independent in Parliament? How significant is this?
I think Jonathan Kange has no significance at all. He's going to be ZANU-PF through and through, and has studied law and understands law in terms of how ZANU-PF understands and interprets the law very clearly in ZANU-PF terms. He is the least of them all to be expected to be entirely independent or to be able to exercise some level of independence. And I think he's going to use his position in a way to act as a power broker and also to benefit himself in terms of climbing up the political ladder. He still has, and also trying to reconnect with the ZANU-PF elitists in terms of him actually going against the party in the election. But let me just add to what you were just talking about in terms of the position of the speaker and the role they play. If you look at it for all reasons, the speaker is the fourth in line in terms of power, but also quite critical even for a dictatorship in terms of allowing certain bills to go on the floor, allowing the amount of time, and deciding when a vote is taken and so forth. And the dictatorship does need this in terms of it to move the debate forward. I think the very important point that we shouldn't set aside here is the fact that this appointment is part of the power struggle in ZANU-PF, where while we want to ensure that Mnangagwa and Mujuru square up to succeed Mugabe, you also want to make sure that you have positioned and placated the Matabele vote in a reasonable way, so that when this fight happens, that vote can be swung by Mugabe towards the side that is favoring between the two warring sides. So in terms of these powerful positions, it is very clear to me that they are not an accident, and they are decided basically on the basis of Mugabe's strategy for exit.
So which faction does he belong to?
He is neutral, as my other colleagues have said. He seems to be neutral, but he's not necessarily neutral. He's one of those guys that can make a decision that will follow the leadership, that will not go into a controversial subject, will not take up a controversial subject. Therefore, in that case, when he takes a side, most people within ZANU-PF will be forced to believe that it is a reasonable side, because he is not known to be controversial or to follow controversies where they are. And therefore, he can pull a small crowd, given the position that will give him a little bit of legitimacy and legitimize what he says or what he thinks. But also that, in terms of the succession debate itself, Mugabe will have to change a few laws going forward. Mugabe will have to entrench a few regulations as he goes forward. And he will need somebody who can be swayed so easily. And that's the greatest danger with this appointment. This guy can be swayed so easily, and as we've already said, owes a little bit to Mugabe personally. And therefore, it's going to be a very useful tool for Mugabe's exit strategy.
Rejoice, what do you make of this? How influential is Jacob Mudenda?
Look, like my colleagues have just noted as well, that, parliamentary work, especially as Speaker of Parliament, personality and individual ambition are very, very important. I mean, I think people like Starion Ndebele, you can sense that, he's a man who wanted to see, change, a man who wanted to see some innovation in the way, the business of the house is handled. And for Mudenda, I don't, look, I'm not perhaps the right person to judge, but the nature of his character is kind of apologetic, and as Trevor says, he has a lot to be grateful. So he's not going to want to create a direction of debate that contradicts the benefits of patronage. So he might just want to play it safe, and if anything, he might spend more time trying to chide and caution opposition, members of parliament, rather than ensuring that the House, lives up to the expectation of making quality legislation, of making, quality debates on budget and allocation, the oversight. These are the kind of, this is the kind of mandate that a speaker is laden with. And I'm afraid that, perhaps for Mudenda, it might be a bridge too far.
And how independent Rejoice is is Jonathan Samkange, especially when he keeps saying that he's still ZANU-PF and he's going to side with ZANU-PF in Parliament. Why doesn't ZANU-PF just take him like what they did with Kereke?
There it is, So the main reason that ZANU-PF actually accommodated him in that repertoire of electoral cheating, it means that they have inside knowledge that he's their man. The kind of statements that I'm independent, but I'm still ZANU-PF at heart, the kind of statements that tainted people like Jonathan Moyo and even Dawengwa and Makoni when they were leaving ZANU-PF. So when you are talking about independent members of parliament, I don't think that this kind of parliament that we have is likely to produce that sort of, brand. Kereke may have been disowned by Robert Mugabe, but I still believe that, he can still emerge, even if he wins, as a sort of a ZANU-PF independent member of parliament. So the people of Zimbabwe can never, give credibility and credence to that kind of statement that I'm independent, but I will still be side with ZANU-PF. That is not independence. That is, a sign of weakness.
Mm. And Trevor, going back to an issue that Nkululeko raised earlier on about the MDC, the composition of the parliamentarians from the MDC side, he mentioned that people like Mudzuri have come back and they could prove to be, more powerful now that they're in parliament. And he mentioned Tendai Biti. Tendai Biti is the Secretary General of the party, and he's now in parliament, and the president of the party is nowhere to be seen. How significant is this?
Yeah, Violet, I was actually going to raise that issue in terms of the political dynamics within the MDC itself. I think soon after this past election, we heard murmurs from some of the MDC T members who were now saying it may be time for Morgan Tsvangirai to retire. In my understanding, I could be wrong, but my understanding is that in the meetings that they had last week, they then endorsed Morgan Tsvangirai to continue to being leader. But what that reflects is that there is a nuanced discussion or notion or perception within the MDC that Morgan Tsvangirai may not really deserve where he continues to be. There could be a certain quarter in the party that may really be pushing that kind of line. So in terms of the stability and the assurance of Morgan Tsvangirai's position in the party, for me, I would like to say it is not as assured as it would have been way before the election. So the dynamics are such that now you have got a parliament where the leader of the party is outside of parliament, and you've got Tendai Biti, like you said, who's the Secretary General of the party. You've got Mudzuri, who's also now in parliament, and there could be others as well who have been perceived not to take the same line as Morgan Tsvangirai. So what that does is that the questions that we need to ask and throw across the table is that, does the absence of Morgan Tsvangirai out of the corridors of state power and out of parliament therefore give impetus to that segment of the party that may not have confidence in his leadership to therefore regroup under the caricature of other state institutions like parliament, and therefore be able to take him on from that angle? Those are questions that we need to throw across the table, but I will not be surprised if we start to see a lot of dissonance within the MDC in terms of what happens in their parliament business and then what happens in their national executive as a party.
I'd like Nkululeko and Rejoice to answer that question, but just before they do, does it really matter, Trevor, that Morgan Tsvangirai is outside parliament, because he's never really been in parliament, he's never been elected parliamentarian before, and he has survived. So why should this be different this time around?
Yeah, I mean, look, the political terrain is different. There is no empirical answer to this particular question. All we can do is perceive. But what we're saying is, in the history of the MDC before the 2013 election, you would realize that Morgan Tsvangirai's brand, I believe, he has really been very quite strong, to an extent that even if he was in his own bed sleeping by night, his brand will still reverberate across the party in other institutions as well. But this time around, because of what happened in 2013, his brand has taken a knock to an extent that the issue of him not being in parliament may slowly become an issue of the lack of his visibility. In the last 4 years, remember, he's been the prime minister, and the ordinary person like, any any ordinary person would slowly hear more of Tendai BT in Parliament, would hear more of Tendai BT even in the Herald in terms of reports that are coming out of Parliament. But Morgan Tsvangirai may then become a very silent voice because he's not in any institution that projects his voice. Those are the kind of perceptions that I'm alluding to.
Nkululeko, do you agree? Is the Morgan Tsvangirai brand in trouble?
The Morgan Tsvangirai brand is in trouble in many ways, and I think that the opening of Parliament is one addition to the crisis that he faces. Let me be very clear. The reason why Morgan Tsvangirai has succeeded politically and his brand has not been damaged after previous elections is simple. There are multiple of them, but one of them is this. Immediately after the 2000 parliamentary elections, you then had the 2002 presidential election, which meant that Morgan Tsvangirai didn't stay out of the limelight for far too long before you began campaigning for him for the presidency. That brought him back to take the leadership. But in that small period, if you were connected to the MDC, you could see the parliamentarians beginning to shape policy of the party, and that they had so much influence when they walked into the party building itself, just as much as he had, that the resources that they have access to and the clout and the attention that they get would tend to eclipse Morgan Tsvangirai if he didn't have anything to put him up on the spotlight. Then you had, immediately after 2002, you had 3 years down the line, the 2005 elections and the 2008 elections, which had huge gaps in between. And by this time, Morgan Tsvangirai had completely recovered from his loss in Buhera in 2002. In the year 2000, the 2002 elections were disputed and were followed by the mass uprising, the final push in 2003 and so forth. Those things kept Morgan Tsvangirai on the spotlight. It is very unlikely that you're going to be able to see any of these activities and opportunities and windows for Morgan Tsvangirai to project himself onto the population and continue to be seen as being in control. And I think these parliamentarians, people like Mudzulu, who were put in a tight corner and ignored by Morgan Tsvangirai when he had problems as mayor of Harare, are going to insert themselves into the situation in an unprecedented way unless they are not really political. And I think that's going to present massive problems. In terms of the executive saying that Morgan Tsvangirai can stay on his leadership, of course they're expected to say that because their leadership depends on his leadership. They're bound to the Morgan Tsvangirai era. And if they were to say, well, Morgan Tsvangirai is not a leader anymore, they would not be sure and certain about their own position. So I think it is very important to watch what these individuals do in Parliament in terms of trying to take over from Tsvangirai. And that's only where Tsvangirai is going to be unfit, and he has no control, and that's where all his opposition is. At the same time, this is different from Mugabe. He has put a lukewarm, unthreatening individual in charge of the parliamentary process as the leader in Parliament. And I think it is important for us to talk about who, not just about who is the Speaker of Parliament, who is the Deputy, but who is not. Why is it that it's not Mutasa who's taking that position or any other top ZANU-PF member? It's because Mugabe is managing and fearing what Tsvangirai must fear.
So, Rejoice, Tsvangirai survived in 2000, he survived 2002, 2005, 2008. And so what does he need to do now in 2013 to stay afloat since these guys are saying that he may be in trouble?
Look, even in basic marketing, really brands come and go, some die. So it's nothing. It's not it's nothing new for a Morgan Tsvangirai political brand to fade off the market. So I believe really, even when he was prime minister, he had a great opportunity to recover and consolidate his position as a statesman and a leading politician in Southern Africa. But we are now talking about during his time, during his wake, when MDC has almost lost irrelevance in the political scene. So really, I think that when Democrats talk about leadership renewal, there mustn't be any sacred cow. As my colleagues say, that if he is no longer in government or in parliament, it means that there is less spotlight on him, which leads one to believe that perhaps it is now time for other torchbearers to come into play. I don't really believe that as Nkululeko says that even if he's in his sleep, the brand reverberates. But his constituents is extremely disappointed, and I believe that
But he's been endorsed by his constituency again. If we're to go with what Trevor said, that the NEC and the standing committee of the party said they still wanted him to remain as leader. So surely this should show that they still have confidence in him.
Yes, the challenge, Violet, is that what the individuals in these structures are saying is different from what the bulk of the electorate may say. There are more people who want to vote than those who actually vote. So if MDCT want to remain relevant, even in 2018, they should look beyond what their individual structures say, because there have been a lot of arguments about his inability to galvanize these structures around certain, democratic practices. So I feel that really, we this smoke screen of, global acceptance by his structures cannot be used as a litmus, for his possible success in 2018. And if there is no leadership renewal in MDCT, we might be looking at another loss of representation in Parliament.
Yes, Violet, if I can also reflect on what Rejoice has just been saying about the national executive of the MDC endorsing Morgan Tsvangirai. Rightfully, yes, it's the national executive that has endorsed him. But you also need to look at the context of that endorsement. I think there are people in when people talk about leadership renewal in the MDC, I don't think they are primarily just focusing on Morgan Tsvangirai and then it stops there. I think they are looking at the whole national executive. They are looking at what they call the standing committee. And I think in those particular structures, there is a whole lot of people that need to be plugged out if the party is going to renew its leadership and effectively move forward. So some of them could have endorsed him out of the fear that should they ask Morgan Tsvangirai to go, then they are the next ones to also be asked to go by the constituents of the party. Therefore, you can see that this could have been a protective mechanism of endorsing Tsvangirai so as to protect their own positions as well. But I truly agree with what Rejoice has said. I think the mandate must be derived from the people, and I don't think the same kind of endorsement that came from the NEC can confidently be assumed to be the same kind of endorsement that may come from the general constituents of the party.
Okay, and what about the MDC led by Joram Gumbo? They only have 2 parliamentarians, and those were not voted in. One of them is Priscilla Mesiarambe Mushonga. So what can you say about the status of this party, especially in parliament?
Yeah, I think also it's the MDC has been affected by what we call the case of fragmentation. Within the party, you would realize after the 2005 split, they also brought in Atham Tambara. Atham Tambara had his own thing going with Joram Gumbo. At one time, we had 2 parties coming out of the MDC. And then going into this last election, there was a lot of hope in Zimbabwe that the MDCs would come together, which failed on whatever grounds we may not be sure. But I think Joram Gumbo needs to take a long-term view or short in terms of politics in Zimbabwe. I know he's quite an astute technocrat, but I think in terms of his political acumen, that's something that he still needs to develop. But also, I don't write him out and his party as being completely out. I think it also depends on what kind of rebuilding strategies they come up with, what kind of rebranding they bring to their party, and what kind of leadership strengthening they also embark upon in their own party. And also they need to enroll the party just out of the enclave of being based in one geographical location of the country, and also try and tread upon the wider scope of the Zimbabwean landscape. But look, I think as long as they are being sober about the 2013 election, they still have an opportunity to rebuild and go forward.
Nkululeko, what can you say about the MDC?
I think looking at this from a technical point of view and politically, I think that their strategy failed them. But going forward, there's one thing we need to realize. If Morgan Tsvangirai had won this election, then Joram Gumbo would be nothing to talk about today. Why is that so? It's because this election, before it happened, on the 31st in the morning, 12 a.m. on the 31st of July, was for Morgan Tsvangirai to lose, for Mugabe to win, and for Welshman Ngube to survive. Okay, and that scenario changes when Morgan Tsvangirai fails to win the election by hook or crook, Mugabe wins surprisingly, and Welshman Ngube does pretty bad, enough for him to die. But because Tsvangirai hasn't died, hasn't made it, he has, just as my colleague says, a chance to rebuild and move forward. But he's going to have to concentrate on the fact that, as my colleague says, he's a wise, a clever technocrat who doesn't have the necessary skill or understand what you'd call political strategy or the strategy of winning elections. On those bases, if he begins to address those issues, he has an opportunity to move forward, an opportunity to resell himself to the country. But I think he has better chances now than Morgan Tsvangirai has, not because of what he's done, not because of what he achieved, but because all the attention is on Morgan Tsvangirai.
Right. Rejoice, do you agree with that?
Well, in a way, really, because, Welshman Ngube he did not have that much opportunity to be judged as much as Morgan Tsvangirai when he was Prime Minister. But there are those who argue that perhaps people keep saying that he is not necessarily an astute politician, but he's a good tactician and so forth. But then if you look at even the way his numbers have grown in the past, he could have easily given up in 2008, but he kept going. But then the opportunity really is now to rebuild the institution rather than sitting back and throwing, one's proverbial hand in the air. People still argue that even accusing Morgan Tsvangirai of letting his guard down is unfair because there is an element of electoral cheating by ZANU-PF. So the numbers cannot be used for judging the both political parties' performance. But really the point is that at the end of the day, he should sit back and say, what do I do to perform better in 2018? His hands are less tainted, for want of a term. And I think it's a great opportunity to go back to the constituencies and say, guys, I think we have an opportunity to rebuild ourselves.
And, there are not that many women in Parliament right now, but I've heard quite a few people saying it's encouraging to see that you have people like Priscilla Msiarambi-Mushonga who are back in Parliament because she's seen as a person who's vocal, outspoken. So do you think this is encouraging that, you have people like her back in Parliament?
Well, you see, the Constitution did well to create a kind of a quota for women. And really that came through hard work, through a serious lobby and relentless, publicity. So every other additional woman in Parliament is a credit to the democratic, situation in Zimbabwe. And I believe that, again, this is an opportunity for women to prove that given an opportunity to lead and present themselves to the constituency, they can shine better than men.
And what do you make of Edna Madzongwe's election as the Senate President, or retaining that position? What do you make of that?
Again, in short, it shows how tired and how uncreative the ZANU-PF political machinery. How many women are in that party who could have taken that position? Probably not less than 10,000. So I believe that, again, the politics of patronage and payback has played a big role here. And I believe that we needed a new face in that position.
The Senate, Trevor, is it just, some people see it as just a ceremonial thing. How important is the Senate?
Well, I've looked at just the brief history of the bills that have been referred to Senate. And in the past, I've always wondered why the Senate exists, because I've not seen any robust engagement with those bills. I've not seen any other input that I would say is either credible or technical quite innovative in terms of the bills that have been referred to Senate. So for me, again, it's not just a question of composing members and having the Senate in place, but it's a question of, has it played its function in the past, and will it play its function in this coming parliament? It takes us back to the issue, the question of 2005, which it resultantly led to the splitting of the MDC in terms of the role of Senate. I mean, whether we really need a Senate or whether we don't, for the size of country we are and for the kind of mechanics we have in terms of our arms of state. I think we need to technically deal with that particular question, because right now I believe we are giving political answers to the issue of whether we need Senate or not, and we are not giving technical answers. But I think we need an in-depth analysis of that at this particular juncture.
And Nkululeko, just going back to the National Assembly, how do you think ZANU-PF is going to use its two-thirds majority in Parliament?
I think that what ZANU-PF is going to do is that it is going to want to see a very weakened Parliament, a very weakened National Assembly, so that most of the decisions, especially because you're going to go through a succession debate within ZANU-PF itself, most of the debate is managed by the executive or by ZANU-PF itself. It is not by accident that you have more than 90% of the current parliamentarians from the ZANU-PF side who are people who have no history, who have no ability. It's not an accident that you have no Timber there and that the bulk of them are like him. It's simply because the leadership in ZANU-PF wants to be able to control processes within the parliament, and the Speaker of Parliament itself shows me the same, that there's a desire to control. Let me hasten to say that all institutions, including the Senate itself and the Parliament, are not necessarily and do not always turn out to be how they are written in constitutions. Institutions depend on who is there and what the people who are in there are doing. There are times in the American history, for example, where the Congress was far too more powerful than the president, and there are times when the president was far more powerful than the Congress itself. It does depend on the personalities in play. And I think that we might be able to see this if those parliamentarians stop playing into the party-led groupthink. They start thinking as individuals and acting individually. But there's no chance of that with the caliber of the MPs that we have at the moment in the House of Assembly.
And Rejoice, I spoke with the ZANU-PF Chief Whip, Joram Gumbo, earlier on, and he basically said that his party has no intention right now of changing the new constitution. What do you make of that?
This is very surprising, considering that this is the same political party that produced 335, alterations to the first draft that was, sending signals of being a very liberal and positive, constitutional document. So it has been said over and over again that we wanted two-thirds majority so that we're able to put in constitution those things that we feel we were prevented from doing by the MDCs. So I was sitting on the same table at the same desk that the Gumbo who is talking was sitting, and it was very clear in their eyes that at the very first opportunity they would temper around with those things that do not require the national referendum. So I can assure you that all these elements that we felt were protecting Zimbabwe's liberal democratic order, ZANU-PF would be very keen to change them.
Trevor, what do you think?
Yeah, I think what you are seeing in terms of certain critical ZANU-PF reactions to certain fundamental issues is what I would call either it's a panic mode or it's a lack of coherence on particular issues. In the last couple of weeks, we've had even some of the former ministers in the ZANU-PF the government coming out and saying the economic and empowerment policy is not going to be changed. We're actually going to increase the threshold from 51% to 100%. We've also had a clash between what Maemu Juru said a few weeks ago about the next government being able to engage with Western countries, and then Mugabe coming out a few days later and saying the direct opposite. We now hear Joram Gumbo talking about the party not going to change the constitution. We've also heard Chinamasa just after elections talking about a whole range of issues, talking about how the legal framework of the country is going to be. What you seem to see is there's a whole lot of joking for favors, or ZANU-PF leaders who are trying to posture positions of being the most representative of what ZANU-PF is all about. And for me, I think this is what we always realize immediately before the announcement of cabinet. I don't think what you are hearing now from a lot of these ZANU-PF people is actually the policy that ZANU-PF is going to go by. I think this is all posturing, trying to project a prospect to Mugabe of them being quite a fundamental player in the cabinet that he may then appoint, or any other state institutional positions that may be on offer. But I think until you hear Mugabe open his mouth about what ZANU-PF is going to do in the next 5 years, only then can we take all these things seriously. For now, I think let's take this as political grandstanding.
Okay, we have come to the end of our program on First Talk. Thank you to our guests, Rejoice Ngwenya and Nkululeko Sibanda on the line. Nkululeko Sibanda is in the UK, and Rejoice in Harare, and also Trevor Maisiri from the ICG. Thank you very much for talking to us on the program First Talk.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please join us again tomorrow night for another edition of First Talk with Violet Gonda. Good night.